Why, hello there. I hope you're doing well. Today I'm drinking Hot Date from Proud Mary Coffee. It's one of the ones that I brought down from Portland down to California. It's an interesting coffee. It's not overly expressive. It just kind of tastes like a good cup of coffee, which is interesting because it's part of Proud Mary's Wild collection. But it really just tastes like a mocha in a lot of ways. Just a chocolatey coffee with a hint of extra sweetness that could be from a fruit. Anyway, I enjoy it. Proud Mary's one of my go-tos, of course. Today we're going to discuss a couple books that I think are important, especially given everything that's happening in Minnesota, Minneapolis, and what I've heard is going to be happening in Ohio to the Haitian community there. I wrote a blog the other day somewhat about this, and there's a link below. But I still wanted to talk to you about this because I think it's important. So today we're going to talk about A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, which was published in 2010. And we're also going to discuss Read This When Things Fall Apart by Kelly Hayes, published in 2025. And I'll touch briefly on Let This Radicalize You, also by Kelly Hayes, and How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which I've both discussed in other videos. So if you want to check those out, they'll be up there. So I learned about Paradise Built in Hell while reading Wayward by Chuck Wendig, which I still plan on doing a video about sequels, and that's one of them. The book is a post-pandemic book, both in terms of like the world that it's written in and the time when he wrote it. The first book is called Wanderers, and in that book there's a disease that kind of starts impacting certain people. It's a fungus-based disease. You can almost see that there's similarities between what happens in like the type of fungus it is between The Last of Us and Wanderers, but instead of like people becoming zombies forever, they die after a couple months. So there's a huge decrease in population and millions of people died. It's much worse than COVID, but it was published right at the beginning of COVID. So it was kind of a prescient book because of the things that Wendig describes in it happened in real life to some extent, like the reactions for different groups and the reactions of other groups. In Wayward, Wendig quotes Solnit as an epigraph because in that book the entire world has fallen apart and these disparate communities have come together and rebuilt in a variety of different ways. And in Wayward, you actually get to see that. You also get to see the idealized community from one AI's aspect and compare that to human-centric communities, which are very interesting in their variety and differences. So it makes sense that Wendig quoted this book because the entire book digs into a variety of disasters and the immediate response the community has to those disasters. It digs into how various aspects of leadership, of the different locales respond. So leadership could mean like someone who is a local community authority or someone who is a military leader or a local elite type thing. and because of the different goals and needs of these leaders, there are different ways that they respond and different ways that they are at odds with each other. And which is really clear in the first disaster, which is the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. And she really digs into what different neighborhoods do to support the different communities themselves, because San Francisco is pretty big and there's very distinct communities that the various different communities were able to set up different types of responses. And the city government itself reaches out to a nearby military base in the Presidio, which is a big park in the northern part by Golden Gate Bridge. And the military acts as if the residents of San Francisco are the enemy. And this is described as elite panic, and the elite of the city are pushing the military behave a certain way. And this elite panic is a very common theme that we're going to see with it throughout. And Wendig actually does a really good job in both Wanderers and Wayward to kind of describe it. And I would argue in Wayward you can kind of see like the full mass, the way that all these billionaires are building these bunkers right now. You see that play out in this community that is billionaires who live in a missile silo, which I feel is both a nod to Silo and some of the other books that kind of talk about that, which I think is great. So Solnit didn't coin the term elite panic. It was coined by a much earlier author, but she uses the lens quite often to analyze the 1906 earthquake, the 1985 earthquake in Mexico City, the 89 San Francisco earthquake, 9/11, and Katrina. In each, the community or local people take care of themselves in a way that we generally don't see in the news. You hear about the fact that there's all these looters, and what often it is people who are looking for resources because there's no other place to get the resources, and they're using it to community to share with their community. So you don't actually go in. The news generally just shows someone who's running into a store or running out, but it doesn't show where they go or what they do with that afterwards. And these interviews or these individual accounts kind of describe what the community does with that afterwards. In some cases, it's a local soup kitchen that popped up in Golden Gate Park, or it's in the Mission. There's one family that set up took their stoves outside and were able to start making soup, and then people started bringing them more supplies so they could keep making it, and they just worked on shifts and kept supplying hundreds and hundreds of people of food. But they were just collecting, they had to collect resources from somewhere, and that is a lot of the looting that goes on. And what's incredible is that little bit of property that's being looted is treated as more valuable than people. Somebody breaks into, a grocery store and they steal food and they get killed for it. That is a disproportionate response that is part of what makes elite panic. One of the ways that local people take care of themselves and over the authorities is during 9/11, the Port Authority was one of the organizations that managed the Twin Towers. I had no idea that that they were city managed instead of, more of just a local real estate. And after the first plane hit, the Port Authority was actually telling people to stay in the buildings, which, the people who were getting called for 911 or whatever didn't have a full view of what was going on or what really had happened. I know that from my perspective as a freshman in college, that this was just unbelievable that a plane had flown into a building like this. It was incredible. I had a friend who made a joke about that CNN was hacked because our professor had put up on a on a projector the website that he was looking at with it, but it was real. It just was completely unbelievable. And whenever I went home to my dorm room, I found my roommate was watching it on CNN, and we watched live the second plane hit the tower. And so now looking back, it just seems insane that anybody would say stay in the buildings whenever a plane had hit a building. It just seems like the most rational thing to do is to just get the fuck out of there. For us, there was a bit of a difference between what was happening on the ground and what was happening in the news. And this is something Solnit kind of discusses, is the way that we were seeing the looping of planes hitting buildings and people falling out of the buildings and the buildings collapsing over and over again, which was a continual traumatization. Whereas the people who were actually in the community that left the building, they weren't really constantly reliving it. They were getting out of the city. They were going across bridges. They were trying to find, they ended up were trying to help each other, try to take care of people who were hurt, or, they literally carried people down the stairs that were handicapped. And so there was this community effort to rescue people and to feed people and to move the community into a safer environment, because nobody knew what was going to happen next. Everybody was afraid that something else could happen, but there was also a coming together that the community experienced that we didn't really hear about from the news. We didn't hear that people were kind of having, with a less perfect way to say it, a street party where they were all together on the street feeding each other, making sure people got where they needed to. People who had never met each other were taking people to their home. And there was kind of a dropping of racial identity. It was an acceptance of, we're New Yorkers. We just survived this terrible thing. You're my brother, my sister, my sibling, whatever. And people helped. The world was falling apart. People chose to help each other. And I think this is kind of where, I think Kelly Hayes kind of indirectly learned, or because she was part of some of these community response groups across various tragedies or community actions. That's where some of these ideas for Read This When Things Fall Apart comes from, which is a series of letters from activists or other activists to activists and other readers who are just kind of interested in it. And many of those people were involved in a variety of different crises. And, a crisis could be, the Black Lives Matter protest, something happening like 9/11 or some other disaster. And sometimes it's just, whenever somebody that you really care about in the community dies, and how do you deal with that grief, or what do you do whenever that project that you've been building fails? How do you deal with that? And then there's also how do you raise children in this sort of world where everything is on fire, or how do you as a disability activist respond to ableism within the activist world with people who are supposed to be allies and be really supportive, but still use the wrong language or have meetings in buildings that only have stairs. It's little things that people don't think about because they don't need to. There's other things they're worrying about. That doesn't mean that it's not something that they don't care about. It's just that we're human and there's a limit to what we can do. And that can be hard on everybody because you want to be included and someone unthinkingly excluded you because they were worried about other things. It's a challenging thing. These letters really were fascinating to me. I'm not personally active as an activist. I do writing, I do videos. I care about a lot of these things. I wrote, I donate money to, I think it's more important to donate broadly than a lot to a little, because there's a lot of different goals out there and organizations have different priorities and different objectives. And so donating a lot of money across a lot of places allows that to be spread across local resources and used in a way that's, potentially best for those situations. And one of the letters was really written to me, specifically people who don't feel like they're doing enough, because I generally don't. And it's interesting. One of the things that they say is that, we are doing enough and we're never doing enough. So no matter what you're doing is never going to be enough. You're never going to feel like you're doing enough, because of X, Y, Z reasons. And whatever you're feeling like you're able to contribute is enough because you're contributing something which is better than nothing. And you don't need to be doing everything. You can focus on something. And because humans are complex with able to hold multiple things at once, just because you're focused on this over here doesn't mean you don't care about that. It's just you're letting somebody else take over ownership of this while you're doing this. And that's okay because there's experts at this over here and you want to be an expert at this over here. And we need to be more graceful about letting people do that. It's not, you shouldn't challenge people when they're like, oh, so you don't care about this. That's not the right thing to do it. If you can engage in a conversation, it's like, this is what I care about. How do these things intersect with each other? I donate for, civil liberties. And often there's a gap between like what an organization like the ACLU will support and like what mutual aid will support. So then you need to have a conversation about how can those two things be self-supporting so that I can be, enable one thing so it does more, or what the intersection is there, or how can I, stretch the money that I do provide to do more than just one goal. And, that's challenging to do, especially because you never know what these organizations are really going to do. You read and it's like, oh, you want to maximize the percentage that goes to other giving. I mean, is that true? I mean, you want activists to be paid, like people who are running organizations to be paid a living wage. You want the organization to be effective. And so you want it to have a certain amount of money that they retain, because if you just give the money away, then you may be less effective. Or, like maybe you should just give the money to the local group that is getting the money from that larger group. So there's a lot of kind of complicated feelings around donations and things like that. And part of this is really about self-care. It's like, what can you do in a crisis, and what can you do during an activist period? And right now we're having the no ICE protests, the no King protests. What's going on in Minnesota is a continual escalation through ICE. And I know I can't go out there because I have these health issues, and I'm paranoid that there's going to be a time whenever ICE goes into the community, the neighborhood that I live in, and just start tossing tear gas. And that's going to cause me serious problems. And that's whenever I'm trying to stay out of the way, and ICE is just being ICE. So one of the things that you can do is you can say, okay, there's probably a dedicated group of people that are working on it. So what you would do instead of stressing about it too much is to try and identify that group and figure out how to provide them funds. A lot of them might be very difficult to get a hold of. You might only be able to get a hold of like the person in charge or the base of the organization, and not any of the other people doing it because it's a risky thing to be doing. That's fine. That person is put themselves out there from the community perspective so that you can find them, so that you can support them and let them do the thing that they're good at, that they've already built this whole machine for doing. One of the things that's interesting is the way that you can go from being a non-activist to becoming an activist through a disaster. And somehow, some ways, how that doesn't happen for some people. And someone that really focuses on the unions in Mexico City after the earthquake in 1985, where there was a lot of corruption with both the Mexico City government and the Mexican federal government that allowed really poor quality buildings, not like buildings that weren't up to code for earthquakes. And since Mexico City was built on a lake, it used to be where like the whole part of the city was a lake, and they just kind of covered up the lake. So that makes it prone to some sinkholes and earthquakes and things like that, because water gets eroded away underneath it, or soil gets eroded underneath it. So what happened is a lot of garment makers were killed, and so some of the survivors who they got lucky were they joined up with the unions that already existed and kind of supercharged them. They weren't activists before. They didn't understand why you'd want to be an activist, and then they suddenly became one, and they became awakened by this. And one of the children of one of the activists said, it wasn't the earthquake that awoke in Mexico City that drove the change. It was like the earthquake woke something up in this kid's mother, who became a very fierce advocate that was one of the driving forces driving the union forward. So it's then that like existing activists can work to engage more people. Like people are already trying to be engaged, and there's an opportunity to pull them into the organization. But you also have to be aware that there's going to be friction, because you're going to have people who are, like project managers or experts in some way outside of the activist group that they decide to join. But there's activists who are experts at being an activist in that leadership group. And there's going to be friction there because, there are different languages around how to talk in activist communities. And some of it is eye rolling, like you can feel like you want to eye roll whenever you read it. And that is something that is a type of cynicism that is poisonous. One of the things that I know gets the most eye rolls, and it's dumb, but also like I get it, is the activists who are part of the land reclamation project for indigenous people, that they will state the land that they live in and which indigenous groups that it was stolen from. It's important to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge that the United States and Canada was built on a genocide. And there are communities that if we don't talk about that, we'll forget who they were. And we'll forget who was the specific community that was in Portland, Oregon, or the variety of them as that overlapped there, or in San Francisco. It's important to know who they were, because that is part of who this country went through to become who it is. And the fact that you talking about that can provide context to things like what ICE is doing now, because what ICE is doing now to white people is what they did first to Native Americans or escaping slaves or black people, or other communities. The Mexicans in places like New Mexico were treated very, very badly, and they didn't do anything except just stay in the same place after the U.S. took the land from Mexico. So I get why people can be eye-rolling about that, because it is a putting it in front of you in a way that you can't ignore when that's not something that's the top priority for you. It's like, okay, do we have to care about that too? Even within this book, Read This When Things Fall Apart, only a couple of people kind of acknowledged it, this specific thing. And you can tell within these activists that there are certain fields where, yes, they kind of overlap, but they are in their own spot. And, so you had one or two that focus on the indigenous people and making sure that was discussed and put in front of people. And then you had other people who were discussing disabilities. And what I thought was interesting is that there is what I would kind of say is different level of acceptable language between things. And it felt like within the activist community for at least one woman in the disabled community, that using words like CRIP to describe disabled people is something that is allowed within her community, but I don't think that would be allowed from outside of the community into the community. Or someone who is able-bodied would not be allowed to use that word. It took me a while to understand some of the slang that this woman was using, and it was really interesting. I mean, she was a black queer woman, so there's all sorts of layers of slang and variety of language that is so far removed from mine that that I'm not surprised that it took me a while to understand it. So I think these two books are interesting to read together because they are books that really address what to do after things fall apart during a crisis. Community forms every time after some sort of a crisis. We're seeing that in Minneapolis. We've seen that with 9/11, Katrina. We've seen it with other earthquakes, floods or tsunamis. Every time a disaster strikes, community is formed. And Elite Panic pushes back against that community. And I think that's an important thing to really talk about, because in one of the letters they were talking about activists being beaten by police. And whenever you're being beaten by police, you're really being beaten by the elite. The elite generally push back hard against any left-leaning organization. It's pretty like the military, the capitalist wing of things, and the government have a sense that they need to be in control, and more left-leaning things are generally community-driven and decentralizing, whether it's fully decentralizing or some other sort of approach, but it's more egalitarian, and nobody gets more than anybody else. People who are elite expect to get more. They expect to be first in line, expect to get more soup, they expect to get more clothes. But when they're treated as the same as someone who is formerly unhoused, they're resentful of that. And that's where they use their ties to outside of the community to regain control. And that's where people looting their homes, the rich people's homes, because they have more supplies and more good resources that can help the community in this tragic event, that's where looting happens. Shoot first, ask questions later. And that even makes things more complicated, because some of those people could be going home when they get shot. They could be gathering their own things, or they could have been told by a neighbor to go get these things from the house, and they're treated as looters and shot and killed. And thousands of people die from it. There is something that every time that seems to come up, that looting will be persecuted with extreme violence, every sort of one of these crises. And it really gets into a lot of Paradise Built in Hell. Katrina is a really good example of that. Solnit really goes into a lot of detail in that book, in that section, because she was in Katrina for a large portion of it. And because the book was written really recently after the Katrina happened. So there was a strong sense of memory, like she didn't have to go 100 years in the past and try and look up articles and try to piece and cobble together based on a variety of different readings. She could go and interview people who were involved in different community projects from different communities and different groups and get firsthand accounts, and there was way more press coverage and news coverage, and there's just a lot more information about what happened in Katrina. So she could go and investigate things like this one town across the river that was not impacted at all, yet there was a string of black people being murdered and white supremacists and people proudly hunting, white people proudly hunting black people, like all worried about looting, and they felt they had the right to just go and do whatever they want, which is vile. So kind of wrapping things up, I think it's important that we understand the motivations for people in power responding to crises. We need to understand how activists can take advantage of these crises and how to respond when everything seems to be falling apart. It can be amazing how effective both of these books are at providing insight into how to be a better leader during times of crisis or times of stress. Both of these books really provide excellent examples of leadership and how to deal with complex things and complex people who have a lot of things going on, a lot of traumatized people. And, in any organization, people are hurt. And especially if you're going through a crisis or something where a community needs to be galvanizing together for action, a lot of people are going to be hurt. And I think that you can take some of these lessons into work, because like if you survive a layoff, people are going to be hurt. If people are let go, they're going to be hurt. So you can, as a leader, you can kind of say, okay, well, how can I be a human to those folks who were laid off? How can I create space for them so that they can express their anger and bitterness about the company and the any other changes, the loss of their coworkers? They're going to feel betrayed, and they're going to feel really shitty. So looking at these sort of books as a way of saying how can I be a better leader is a good approach, because things fall apart in a lot of different ways. The advice in addressing hurt people in these activist spaces are never really shared in business and management books. It's like business leaders don't think it's worthwhile talking about. I think the only book that I've read that really acknowledges that people are complicated was the book called Managing the Unmanageable, which is about managing engineers and software developers. And a lot of that's because engineers are autistic and they have a variety of responses because of where they might be on the spectrum, and so they are challenging to work with. They are, they have antisocial behaviors. They are introverted. They don't communicate well, and they're strong personalities. So, but people are like that everywhere. They're like that in anything, and acknowledging that is important, because if we ever want people to bring their full selves to anything, we need to understand how to handle that. So if you're a manager, I suggest you read both of these books, because there will be chaos and disaster in your company. There are hurt people you work with. You'll be working with people that have left-leaning policies that may be concerned about the very topics covered in things that fall apart, which will provide extra context for people who are bringing up DEI stuff, people who are trying to push change into the company, and this is a way to build empathy with those people, because those are people who want to bring the whole selves to work. And if you only think about things from a capitalist perspective and a really right-leaning management structure, you're going to not understand the value of any of that sort of stuff. And I think that's a loss on your part. Anyway, I think that's all I want to discuss around these books. I'm sure I'll bring them up again in the future, but do you think I missed anything in these? Was there more you wanted to hear about these books? If so, leave a comment below. Do you have any suggestions on a book that I ought to check out, or a pair of books? I'm thinking of doing just some general political discussions, or just off the top of my head type discussions, just because I've been reading a lot and it's kind of been hard to do the reading and have space to do other activities. So if you have any opinions on that, let me know down below. Would really appreciate it. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great one.